I love cutting ribbons in the state of Indiana, and we do a lot of it.
For Governor Mike Pence, the number of ribbon cuttings is, in his mind, a solid measure of Indiana's success.
1, 2, 3.
On this day, a brand new career and technical education academy for high school students. And then a visit to a local manufacturing small business.
Ew, what a cool place.
In 2014 and 2015, Indiana led the nation in manufacturing growth. But in recent months, the state unemployment rate is just above the national average.
Indiana's a state that works because we've been putting common sense into practice in our state over much of the last 10 years. I don't think our state budget should ever grow faster than the family budgets in the state of Indiana. So we held the line on spending in our first budget to the average rate of inflation over the last 10 years.
On education and the national standards known as Common Core that have been under attack, especially in conservative circles.
I'm proud of the fact that Indiana was the first state to legally withdraw from the national standards of Common Core.
Critics would say it's really kind of like Common Core, but you say it's separate.
I believe education is a state and local function. I'm resolute in my belief that when it comes to the education of our kids, when it comes to public safety on the streets of our community, that government that governs least governs best and is most accountable to the people.
Before he was elected governor in 2012, he represented Indiana as a congressman for a decade, serving as chairman of the House Republican Conference and on the House Foreign Relations Committee, an assignment that took him around the world and to Iraq and Afghanistan multiple times.
What is your sense about the administration's foreign policy overall, and specific areas where you think Republicans have a chance to differentiate?
I think it's entirely possible that 2016 could be the first foreign policy national election that we've had in decades in this country. When you see the erosion of America's credibility on the world stage, the American people know that we've got to change course overseas. We've got to provide the kind of leadership that will once again make it clear that America will stand by our allies, and we will confront our enemies. But I think that would be wise for whoever our nominee would be to make it clear to the American people before the election who their national security and foreign policy team would be.
It was a health care issue, not foreign policy, that Governor Pence confronted President Obama with right on the tarmac when the president visited Indiana in early October 2014, specifically expanding and extending the state's Healthy Indiana plan.
You buttonholed the president when he was coming down Air Force One. It was a good 5-7 minutes.
Look, I think Obamacare needs to be repealed lock, stock, and barrel. That's one of the reasons why one of the first actions I took was to say that Indiana would not set up a state-based exchange. Here in the state of Indiana, we introduced Medicaid reform more than half a dozen years ago. We call it the Healthy Indiana Plan. It requires people who are eligible for Medicaid in Indiana to make a monthly contribution to their own health savings account. It's built on a foundation of personal responsibility. My message to the president that day was that when it comes to expanding health insurance coverage in Indiana, we want to do it the Indiana way.
When you hear somebody say, no, this is Indiana's Obamacare light.
We ruled out expanding traditional Medicaid. Medicaid is a deeply flawed system that ill serves people that are enrolled in. And the state of Indiana has been a leader in consumer-driven health care.
A social conservative, Pence is pro-life and in favor of traditional marriage.
As the American public seems to shift, should a nominee shift?
Well, I will always believe marriage is between one man and one woman. I respect the law. I respect the role of the courts in our form of government. And we'll hew to the rule of law in the state of Indiana.
In 2010, Pence was the top choice for president in a straw poll conducted by the Value Voters Summit, edging out former governors Mike Huckabee and Mitt Romney.
I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order.
Just weeks later, he told us he wasn't running.
Are you considering a run?
I have no plans to run for president in 2012.
Pence considered getting into the 2016 race, too, but decided against it. a decision that came after a major backlash of his signing a religious liberty bill into law that was opposed by many Indiana businesses. The law would have denied services to gay, lesbian, or transgendered customers if business owners said it conflicted with their religion. Weeks later, the law was revised with Pence's blessing to protect the LGBT community, then upsetting social conservatives.
The Religious Freedom Restoration Act was about religious liberty, not about discrimination. Had this law been about legalizing discrimination, I would have vetoed it.
A lot of people look at you as somebody who has a lot of potential. Here's what we come back with, is a guy who's very successful, has foreign policy experience, Capitol Hill experience, now executive experience, but does he have the sizzle to be able to run for president? When you hear that, do you hear it? Do you have the thing that's the selling point for running for president?
You got to remember, I'm a small town guy from southern Indiana. I grew up with a cornfield in my backyard. I remember as a little boy dreaming of someday serving in Congress, and I was able to live that dream. But I don't ever remember even dreaming that I'd have the chance to be the governor of the state that I love. So when people mention me for the highest office of the land, I'm deeply humbled by that.
You grew up here in Columbus, Indiana.
I did. Born and raised.
And where'd you meet your wife?
I met my wife at a church in Indianapolis. She's the light of my life, and it'll be 30 years next year.
He says it's his faith that really grounds him.
I was raised in a very traditional Catholic home, had a wonderful upbringing in the church, 8 years of Catholic education. But when I went off to college, I made a personal decision to put my faith in Christ, and that's been the defining characteristic of my life ever since.
In his spare time, Pence focuses on family. Horseback rides are a favorite pastime, and he calls himself an unapologetic Colts fan. Pence is also a former radio talk show host and cartoonist.
It may be something people don't know as much about me as they might otherwise.
We could use some humor every now and then.
You bet.
Pence's wife Karen joined him for a stop at Jimmy's Cafe. Karen describes her husband as a strong, optimistic leader with a great ability to listen.
When he was in Congress, they would say, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And he would always say, home for dinner.
But as for down the road,
who knows in the future?
What's your biggest vulnerability?
I'm a very content man.
That's the vulnerability, that you're content.
Reminded one time one of my brothers teased me because I didn't shine my shoes. And he said to me, you're not going to go anywhere in those shoes. And I said, well, I like it here. That contentment and that focus on Indiana is where I'll remain, and we'll let my future take care of itself.